Hi, everyone. First, I would like to welcome you to Architecting Delta Sharing for Large Scale. This is going to be an interesting session. I know we can schedule for an hour and a half. I don't think we will need the whole hour and a half, given the fact that it is 4 p.m. on the third day of a conference. But what I promise you, me and my friend Pavan, that you will learn pretty much good stuff, about Delta Sharing. So just to introduce the speaker, my name is Bilal Obidat. I work as a principal solution architect. I joined Databricks 2017 when we are less than 150 employees. I work closely. Product specialist is really an interesting role. It's kind of sit between field engineering and the product team. So I get to work with many of our customers, on their Delta sharing deployment. I also work closely with the product team, make sure our roadmap align with our customer needs. I live in Seattle, Washington, and I have 3 kids. My friend Bavin.
First of all, thank you. It's the last day or almost last session, so it's a tough job for everyone. My name is Bhavin. I'm also a solution architect at Databricks, joined more or less around same time, and we have seen all the growth and all this, unbelievable. Pretty much hands-on experience with all things platform security. So be it deployments, network, data security when it comes to Databricks, across all 3 clouds. And of course, I enjoy bourbon, craft beers. And like Bilal, we share some of the things are same, work hard and have fun, but I don't know why he doesn't like to make money. So that's what we do over here. We got 90 minutes, I don't think. We already made it. Yeah. We got 90 minutes allocated. I don't think we need it, but we'll see. We can go as deep technically as you guys want. So let's get going.
Yeah, I know it's 4 p.m., so feel free to stretch around if you need it. But it's really important at the beginning of this session, I want to kind of highlight what you're going to learn. So it won't hurt our feeling if this is not really what you thought the session is, if you like to go to another session. But what we're going to really discuss, like how to, based on the lesson we learned, like how to architect Delta sharing for success. We'll see a common pattern of successful deployment of Delta sharing. The other part, which is I think it's very important, how to understand the security internal of Delta sharing. So I'll walk you through some of the diagram and some of the kind of security internals of Delta sharing. The other part, which is Pavan will cover, which is the storage configuration of Delta sharing. This is a topic that can come frequently with our customers. So just kind of provide guidance on this part. The last part, we will spend maybe just 10 minutes on Databricks-to-Open. This is one of our amazing features. It resonates well with many of our clients, but it's worth explaining to you and so you can understand what's really the open part of Delta sharing and why it's really important, so you can know how to take advantage of it. Cool. Now, these are kind to set the context of Delta sharing. Now, if you, by the raise of hand, who already use Delta sharing in Databricks? Awesome. So at least to kind of provide some context, collaboration within the enterprise, especially if you are already on kind Delta sharing platform, you will see there is quite a bit of need, to share data across different business functions. And I'm sure you already know this is not really an easy job, especially when you have team across different cloud region. It's even more difficult when they are across clouds as well. But many enterprises, for one reason or another, they could have a whole business functionality on Google as an example. This is where they decided to do one of their team, or it could be a company they acquired, and they are in the process of integrating it. So it's already in Google, while the other part of the company on Azure. So how to kind of share data? This is kind of like quite a bit of challenges. Now, these are the common different scenarios. So there are also some common different scenarios. It could be data licensing from data provider. So if you work, as an example, on a demand forecasting use case, you might need weather data from AccuWeather as an input to your functionality. So that's kind of like, this is the first use case. It could be also SaaS platform, zero copy, bidirectional, if you're using Salesforce data as an example, or if you're using Amperity data for, the user ID and try to build a user graph within the organization. Peer-to-peer sharing, this is mostly about external data sharing. If you have a data partner that you want to exchange data with, it could be in one direction or bidirectional. The other part is just internal sharing across business unit. So it could be you have another business unit in a different GU or a different cloud. Now, I think you can maybe relate to this. This is kind of not really an easy job, because it could be many of the vendor, they could be using on a different platform. You may be already struggling with a lot of this data sharing. I'm talking to clients, they share this data through email, through old good SFTP, It could be many different ways. And also, even if they have a system to share structured data, they have really no way to share unstructured data, or they have a totally different system for that, or sharing AI. So there are a lot of different challenges, as you can see, and that also might lead to a lot of data duplication and latency and cost. It also hinder many of the internal initiative around governance and security. You just have this data, floating around in email or, on a cloud storage as well. So data sharing was released the key drivers that we try to continue to deliver on is really the open part, and also the support to structured and non-structured data and AI as well. And you will see, actually, we will touch base on some of the announcement that we already have today. So the data sources, as you see in this slide, they are, you have the data sources in Delta Lake. They can be also, you saw the announcement today that we will be sharing data from Federated Lakehouse. So you will be able to share data that's already supported by Federated Lakehouse, Redshift or Snowflake data. That's really great. Then you don't have to keep copying the data. So everyone, you copy it once to the organization, and that's not really copy. It's like you connect once to the data and then you can share it internally. So it's across platform, across region, and also you can share it with other system. We will deep dive into the open part, so what it means in the end of the presentation, so you'll understand more. This is just some of the statistics. We are seeing amazing growth with data sharing, especially with customer who has been on Databricks for a year or two. 300% year over year, 40% of active data share using open connectors as well. So some of the vendor, I'm just cool. So we can get to our slide. Now, architecting data sharing strategy. One of the things, when you try to think about your data sharing strategy, you have many different use cases. I pick two use cases, which I see always the pattern here, and try to help you how to design this, how to implement this on data sharing. The first one, this is accessing telemetric data. So airplanes generate a lot of telemetric data, and that telemetric data goes to the, to the airline manufacturer. But the airline themselves, they want access, or they have the right to access this telemetric data. If you see the pattern here, you can also, another use case that may be relevant to you is the clickstream data, the user activity data. I'm sure most businesses have access to this data. This is like a very large volume of data. And you have other teams that they want to access this data. And often what they want to access, there is no really specific pattern. They could be looking for an anomaly of this telemetric data. They could be looking at a small portion of this data, or it could be large, you know. Large is also a relative word, but this could be daily, like terabytes of data. While on the other system, which is another common use case, you have an ML team in a separate region. They want to access some data, but you know, with ML in general, like you really need to access the data multiple times. That's just like every time you train the model gets trained hundreds of times till you get, you know, the right model and before you deploy it. So how to architect for these two different use cases? The other part, it could be just you have a QA team. We have this use case with one of our clients. They are in North America. They're a QA team in Europe, and you know their reporting team is also in another region in Europe. So how to architect this, and what goes into, like, in your decision, what you should be considering. Now, what you should be considering is really, you know, delta sharing is live sharing, right? So you access the data, the recipient access the data live from the data provider. And that's great because you don't have to worry about refreshing this data. You access always the latest state of the data. But also it comes with other challenges. One of these challenges is egress cost. How many are familiar with egress? Oh gosh, everyone. That's great. So egress challenge. So when you're, and this is a fee that you don't really pay for Databricks. This is like a fee you pay for the cloud provider when the data leave. So one of these challenges, like, okay, well, when you design your solution, you want to be mindful, like, okay, how much the egress fees, and the provider always pay the egress fees. For the most part, I know, like, there are some people who work out some deals with the cloud provider or something like that, but for the most part, is really the provider pays. The other part, the implementation effort of creating a local copy. If you look at this diagram, it's always live sharing. However, delta sharing allow you to create a local replica copy of this data. And we will go into the details. What are these tools that you can use to create a local replica of this data? So, and this way also you have to worry about, like, when to refresh this local replica. So my point is, it will be always live sharing, but you can create a local replica if you need to. And what you will consider the other part, what's really the implementation effort it's going to be? Does it really worth, you know, the time? Because, you know, also your implementation overhead is cost as well. And the other part is performance. I think it's obvious the local replica will perform better than, you know, accessing the live sharing. And the last one, which I think it's here at the bottom of the slide, is the data timeless. So how refresh is your requirement? It has to be like really within 5 minutes, 6 minutes. You can schedule these jobs. Now, the good news is, as you see on the other side, these are, the recipient can implement the local replica. So this way they can get access. And you will see this is a read-only access to the table. But that's not really a replica. That's just mostly a pointer to the provider. And then they can run CDF, or they can run deep clone, materialize views. We will discuss all these tools to create a local replica. How many people are familiar with CDF, just like from Databricks? Okay, good. So that's my, that's my point. When you think about these use cases, then you have to balance these factors. And you are the only one who can take this really decision. I just want you to feel that you are empowered and there are the tools to implement replication. You can use live sharing as well. Now, to put this, because I took just like one use case as part of the whole global delta sharing. If you notice, this is the provider on the top part of the diagram, and you have the recipient on the other part. So we have two types of delta sharing, two modes. There is Databricks to Databricks, and there is Databricks-to-Open, as you see on the right part of there. So the non-Databricks customer, they can use one of our connectors. It's a community connector, open source connectors. As you see, they can use Power BI, they can use the Python Panda or PySpark connector. And we just, actually Tableau just released a connector also that work with delta sharing. All of these open source connectors are live connectors. So they will always read the data live. While with Databricks, you have the option, which is the default is live, but you can create, in addition to the live connection, you have a step 2 to create a local replica. Okay? Now, what are these tools? So I'm not gonna provide these kind of deep dive into these tools. The documentation are pretty good in Databricks. And honestly, these are kind of basic tools that we use if you work with Databricks, kind of the data engineering side. But one is CDF. Remember, all these implementation are on the recipient side. They can implement one of these, they can implement a process or a solution that leverage, as an example, CDF to create a local replica. And you see, they only need to configure the share and the table with history, because with CDF, you really need the history. And once there is kind of a link in this slide, there is a notebook that will show you how CDF is being done. And we will share the slide after the presentation. But you create a virtual a view, and then you merge the data to that local replica. So this way, if you think about this solution, you are only paying egress fees for the incremental refresh, which is what you want sometime. So, but the nice thing about this approach, and you will see, you can use it even for kind D2O, and we have a blog about this, like we use it for Bigquery as an example, but you have to use PySpark connector on the other side to apply these changes. But you can use this also to manage egress fees across different regions or across different clouds. The other part, which is, I think, our favorite tool, dbclone, because dbclone is fairly easy. It's kind of one command to set up. dbclone will work in the case of intra-account sharing. Like if you share under two different BUs under the same Databricks account, then you can use just dbclone and to do that. dbclone, as you see in this syntax, it will recognize the new data, so it will do incremental refresh as well. One thing which is, it's kind of like preferred by many customers, it's just easy to implement. The other part, which is really my favorite, the materialized view. I think if you work with data long enough, you know what materialized view is. So the nice thing about materialized view, you create the view as you see on the right side, you create materialized view, and this is just a test, but then you refresh this materialized view. When you refresh it, if you just appending data, it will just bring the incremental update of this, like do an incremental refresh. And it will create actually all the plumbing for you, that command. So this way, on the recipient side, this is pretty awesome. So I could run the materialized view, and I will refresh it every hour or every day. Now, I know one of the challenges which I can hearing from a client is like, okay, well, I really need to refresh it whenever the data source is updated. So we are working on a feature where if the data source, when the data source is updated, it will auto trigger the job that does this refresh. So if you notice here, just I want to highlight the refresh materialize view. This is a command that you will run in the Databricks job or workflow as a step to refresh the table. And you will see that the code is really basic, to implement a local replica if you want to manage the egress fees. Or if you want even just a better performance on the other side of the recipient. So this is it seems really complex program. The solution for these pretty straightforward. We don't have it also in the documentation, but you can also create a view on a shared table on the recipient side, even if you want to enforce some sort of implement, with the views, you can implement dynamic security as well. But that will be on your side, if you want to allow some folks to access a specific type of data, or if you want to anonymize part of this data. So now, one thing I want to highlight, remember the shared table. If you make this available to all the users on the recipient, when they query it, their query will run across the cloud region, and you are paying egress fees. If you implemented a local replica, I know this is a basic thing, make sure they don't have access to that shared table. They have access to the local replica that you created in that, catalog. Just a basic thing, but I want to highlight. Now, the best thing, if you really have more than, if you want to share a table and you have, you want to share it with many different recipients, you don't want to really worry about egress cost. We have an integration with R2 that's already GA. So this is really amazing. So this way, because with R2 from Cloudflare, so this way you do a DB clone of these tables to the Cloudflare storage to R2, and then you just you refresh them on a schedule basis. So everyone who can access them now, they will access them as local tables, and they don't have to pay egress fees. We test the performance. It's almost actually comparable to accessing them locally on the cloud storage. So they did really a good job with that. So if you have that use case, which is common use case with data vendors, so this is one of the solutions that available for you also for delta sharing. That goes to just really the details which I already described here. Now, this is just a summary of these solutions. So you have CDF, you have DB clone and materialize views, or you have a Cloudflare. And this table help you compare these solutions. So we want you really to take an informed decision and make sure you have, the power to reduce cost, enhance performance when you use delta sharing. Cool. Now, I will start with delta sharing security architecture. It's really worth it to understand how delta sharing works under the hood. This is meant also to be 200 level. If you work already with Databricks and you want more of a security review to help you get InfoSec approval, work with your account rep, and we will be more than happy to help with that discussion as well. And we do that often with many of our clients. Just to level set here first. Delta sharing is pretty straightforward in terms of the number of steps you do through the UI, or you can use the SQL API to implement delta sharing. The steps are: you create a recipient, you create a share, you add the asset to that share. These assets can be delta tables. We support also now AI models, and we support also volumes, which is kind of unstructured data storage. And you add these assets, you grant select to the recipient. The recipient, can they create a read-only catalog, and from there they can share it with their team internally. And that's kind of like you have the governance also on the recipient side, so they can control that as well. This is kind of just to show you the workflow of delta sharing. Now, this is really the diagram that I kind of want to spend a few minutes on. I know it looks busy, but in reality, when you discover both Databricks-to-Databricks and Databricks-to-Open in terms of security, so you have the provider side on the left, you have the data recipient on the right. So, and I want to focus like when you query a table. When you query data, you want to first authenticate to make sure you have access to this data to check your entitlement, right? And this is happening like UC to UC between the two UC instances. They make sure, they communicate, they check that you have access to the data. And if you do, then they provide, like the provider UC provide a cloud token to the recipient UC, so they get access to the data. So it's fairly well-managed process within, and secure process within Databricks. When it's Databricks-to-Databricks. With Databricks-to-Open, it's the same thing. It's kind of like it's still managed, because when you have Databricks, if you notice, there is a credential file. That credential file, it has a token, and it has a delta sharing service endpoint. When do you get that? When the recipient get that credential file. They get that credential file when the recipient, they get created by the provider. So the provider, remember, they create the recipient. If they are open, there is like, you can select Databricks or Open, that generate an activation link, and that they provide to the recipient. The recipient use that to download the credential file. But remember, the credential file is being used by the connector. So the connector will get just a reference to that credential file. So that process, it's kind of like happening, within the connector. If you're writing code, using the Python, you just reference that credential file. And that will also authenticate. Everything is logged into Databricks side. This is like, Databricks-to-Databricks or Databricks-to-Open. Once the authentication happened, it depends. There is a need to access to the delta table, and that's step 4. And this is what Pavan is gonna cover, like how to provide this storage, how to configure this storage access, especially if the provider, they have some sort of a firewall for their storage access. Many of them, they just like, many clients we work with, they secure their storage, but they don't really use like a firewall or private endpoint or things like that. If they do, then that require a bit of configuration to provide this access. And we develop some pattern, and most of the solution is really 1 or 2 solution, depends, but they vary based on each cloud. And that's kind of what the Pavan's gonna cover in his demo. You can revoke if for some reason, especially with D2O, if there is the activation link or is leaked, that credential file, you can revoke. There are different ways of dealing with that. You can, rotate the recipient, delete the recipient. It depends really whatever you want to do, but we provide different ways of revoking the access from the recipient. The transport security, as I mentioned, we use like encrypted. The data is, all communication is encrypted with 1.2. So, because a lot of these kind of question, we keep get many of these questions like around the security. I hope that diagram can help you at least to understand how the communication is happening and how it's really being secure. So Pavin is gonna cover the storage access, which is like the step 4, you see, and then I will come back and cover the Databricks-to-Open, so you understand more about this, when to use it, what really the use cases for that.
All right. So, who's gonna walk me through all those 4 steps? Right. What I have in mind is whatever slide you saw, Databricks to Databricks, Databricks-to-Open, we're gonna see it live, so that you get a feel of, right? Like there is a deck. Okay. There is a deck that explains at a high level that there is a metadata exchange. If you see, there are 2 sections. On the top, it says Databricks to Databricks or Databricks-to-Open, and then somewhere at the bottom you have Databricks-to-Open. There are 2 types of data that is being exchanged or shared actually. At the top is the metadata. Metadata is, let's say, the table names and the governance that you have on top of it. The actual data is between the compute or the recipient's compute that is trying to read this share. So we depend upon the cloud native security architecture. Databricks has no role to play. With this design, imagine if you if you happen to use Azure, you may use private endpoints for your ADLS. Or if you happen to use GCP, on GCS, you would have your project secured using VPC service control. Or on AWS, you may use S3 gateway endpoints or VPC endpoints. So the connectivity at a network layer is always between the compute of a recipient and the storage that the service provider uses. So it's a very important distinction between solutions that are available in market. Metadata is from Databricks Unity Catalog to the recipient side, either it's Databricks or Open, once the access is granted through a short-lived token. Let's not get into the details of what token means in this context, but imagine it's a short-lived access that you get, and that access is scoped down to the files that maps to the share that was created, right? So with that, what I have is, let's start with Databricks to Databricks. So how many of you have used Databricks? Is there anyone who is not familiar with Databricks Workspace? What is a workspace? Okay, workspace is a window into the world of Databricks. That is what I call it. So if you happen to use Databricks on top 3 public clouds, you would log into the marketplace, you would search for something called Databricks, and you end up seeing an offering. You follow the prompts, the result of those steps, and you can do it programmatically also using Terraform and CloudFormation and all that. But what you get is a workspace. It has a web front end, it is backed by API, and it is backed by command line interface. So based on your preference, you can use that. Right now, what you see is a web interface. By default, it is integrated with cloud native identity and access management. So I'm going to use Azure. Azure is going to be a provider of share. And on GCP, that is Databricks running on GCP, would act as a recipient. And my Mac, my local system, is going to pretend to be Databricks-to-Open sharing client, right? So we'll do those things. So first thing, I'm going to go ahead, log in, and I want to make sure one more, and I'm going to log into GCP as well. And because we are going to consume share over here, I just want to make sure that the compute is up. Okay, that's good. Now let's go to, so first let's create a share, right? Those who know Jugaad, they know what it means. So first we're going to create a share on Azure, and then we'll access it using Open as well as Databricks on GCP, right? Okay, so let's go over here, Delta sharing, right? Now you can see over here, we can register a recipient. So the beauty of this architecture is when you register a recipient, you can identify using a unique identifier. A unique identifier basically maps to the region and to the Unity catalog unique metastore ID. That is how a provider identifies a recipient. This is something that gets securely shared between the provider and the recipient side, right? And then we'll start locking things down like network layer, IP allow listing and all those things. So let's go ahead and first create what we want to share, right? So I'm going to call it DAIS D2D share between ADB and GCP DB. Okay. Next, what exactly we would like to share? Now, between Databricks to Databricks, there are a bunch of things that we could share: tables, notebooks, models, and stuff that we keep adding, right? Like AI tools. If you were at the keynote yesterday, Casey delivered a demo. All those things will be part of this eventually. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and pick one of the schema. So what we've done, a hypothetical use case, let's say you have a team that has built a RAG-based application on Azure, and now you are sharing with someone who is on GCP, right? Hypothetical example. You can share the whole schema. That means anything that you add in future will be available. Or you can share a given table. You can also share a partition. So think of it like you are getting some data that is partitioned by date, right? And you can share those partitions as well. Right, so I'm going to go ahead over here. There are a bunch of tables. There's a model that's already registered. I'm going to share the whole thing. It says, do you really want to share this whole thing? Yes, right? After that, let's save and continue. I want to share a notebook using which we, like the code that we use to build that model, right? So that on the GCP side, you can also do that. So let's go over here, right? Okay. Now the final step is where we register the recipient. So the first demo is between Databricks to Databricks. I'm going to create a new recipient. Let's give it a name. The sharing identifier. So you would go to the recipient side. This is where the recipient is. And you will pick the recipient's identifier. Right. So I'm going to pick the recipient's identifier, go to the provider, slap it in, and it tells you data is shared between what cloud. If it is same cloud, then you also get to know like the region and all those details, right? Now, if you are sharing data within same cloud, same region, then it's much easier, like egress cost wise and security wise. But imagine if you are sharing data within Azure, but two different regions or two different subscriptions or two different tenants, then we can leverage the likes of private endpoint based communication. So it's a pretty solid solution because, right, security is of paramount concern for everyone, irrespective of the field or the size of the company. So we can do all those kind of things. So once the recipient is registered, we're going to create the share. We're going to pass on the share that we created. So now we have the assets, like the whole schema, if you recall. And within this schema, we also register the model. So if you are familiar, we have something called MLflow. It's an open source project. It's also available within Databricks as a managed service. There is a component within MLflow called registry, model registry. That model registry is now part of Unity catalog. That's why a model shows up over here. All right, so if you are curious, like what really happened under the hood, so that is what is happening. And this data resides within your ADLS. So it's backed by storage that customer provided. It's not backed by Databricks storage. On Azure, ADLS is what we use. So once this is there, we go to the recipient. Okay, I'm going to go to GCP, right? Share with me, and it shows up over here, right? This is the name of the organization. So when you onboard your workspace on Unity Catalog, it asks what is the name of the organization, because this is what the recipient sees on the other side. So this was done before all this, right? Like when you deploy a workspace, after the workspace is deployed, you will be presented with, do you want to use Unity Catalog as a meta store, right? When you create that, at that time you would supply a good name, and that name shows up over here, right? PL, because all of these workspaces are private link enabled. So this is the one. I'll select it. It would list all the shares that are available. So you can have multiple shares. You can see the details, right, from where it's available and all that. I'm going to go ahead and create a catalog out of it. Okay, external. External. And we're going to go ahead and create it. Let's refresh. So now we've got what Bilal was walking you through, right? Live share. And now from here onwards, all those tools, all those different techniques based on the use cases you could do. So we shared tables. We have the model, right? It's going to show up in a bit. So these are the two tables that we shared. Here's the model. But we also shared notebooks, if you remember. So that falls under other assets. Here you could also share something called volumes. So if you happen to have unstructured data, let's say you created a summarization, document summarization model, and there are a bunch of documents you want to supply as part of some test or whatever the use case is. Those unstructured data, images, PDFs, could reside on volumes. Volumes map to a container, depending upon the storage cloud you use, a container within your storage, and those volumes could also be shared over here. So think of it like you have full governance. If it is Databricks to Databricks, you are governing structured data like tables and all, views, partitions, on top of it notebooks, models, and volumes. So all those things will be over here. I have the notebook.
The region. So you can create a local copy, just doing DB clone of this raw documentation and call it like local raw documentation. Every time now you can refresh it as materialized view or as a local copy.
Yeah, now up to this point, there is no actual data access. There is no egress cost involved. Right? Many times what happens, you see this and we are like, you know what, everything is working fine. But no, this is just the beginning, because still the moment I click this, it's going to make a call. If that storage is locked, if there is storage firewall, if you enable private endpoints, if there is an egress firewall, this is going to just blow up. It will give you an error. Depending on the cloud, how user-friendly it is. So here I'm accessing notebook that is available in that workspace. It takes a bit of time, and then you can clone it. Right? So this is the notebook. It's in read-only format. We're going to take care of this UI. I realized it just now, so we'll do that. But you can clone it over here. So I'm going to go ahead and clone it, and then you have full access. Here's the table. Right? So this is still Unity Catalog. At this level, it is Databricks control plane providing all this metadata. After this, if I go ahead and click sample data, whatever cluster, the default cluster it's using, it's going to make a call, pull some sample data out. Now, if I turn on firewall, I have my storage over here. The moment I turn on firewall over here, this will break. So I wanted to get a feel what is happening under the hood, right? So this is all good between Databricks to Databricks. If this is between Azure to Azure, I would use private endpoints. And because private endpoints can go across tenants, across subscriptions, we could do that, like regions as well. Now, the final piece is Databricks-to-Open, right? So let's do that. So I'm gonna go back again over here. I'm gonna show you, Bilal mentioned there is a credential file that you get and you have to share with your open client. So let's see that. We're gonna go over here, Delta share, new recipient, D2 open, right? There is no sharing identifier because this is to an open client, right? So sharing data between DB to open, create. So you get this link. This is a link through which you can download the credential file. I'm not going to open that credential file because it has the access token in it. But what it has actually in there is the name that I provided, the metastore that we're going to use, where the provider's metastore is, and the access token in it. Now, this token has a default lifetime that you can configure. I typically configure, if I'm sharing with open, then depending upon your use case, you may have like 7 days, 1 day, it is up to you. But you can configure it. I'm going to copy this, and if you bring it to the recipient side and enter it, it presents you this, the download the credential. This would typically go into your secrets manager or whatever you use so that you don't get direct access to it. Once you are here, you download it, it's kind of a text file, single line in it. Right? Now what I've done is I already downloaded this file because then I have to configure my Delta client. We have a Delta sharing Python client. It's a simple command. It's a pip install. If you go to Delta sharing Git repo, you'll find that. That is what I've done. And we're gonna use this credential file to access the share. Now I've got another credential file that I already downloaded it before this. So I'll show you. All right, so let's go to the recipients, and here it is. This is the one that I created. The reason it says you can refresh it, right? I refresh it as well as it is not being consumed yet, but this is already consumed. So I'm going to use this, the one that says ADB to open, because I already configured it. Right. You can see it was just done right before our session. I'm going to go back, and it's a extremely simple example, but I wanted to drive home the point how it works. Once you are done with this step, then you can make it as sophisticated as you want, because then you have established the whole connectivity, right? So we are over here. But one thing I forgot, I haven't added any data to the share. We just created this share. So I'll go to this ADB to open. If you go in the share, it's empty. Right now, we have just created the recipient, registered the recipient. So I'm going to go and add, where is this thing? Right, and sharing, share data, to share, and we're going to add one table to it. Okay, just simple table, save and continue. No notebooks, save and continue. And in recipient, remember we registered bunch of recipients. I'm going to select the one for whose credential file is already on my system, right? So we've got D2O share dot default dot ADB provider table. That's the full qualified name of the share. I go over here. Here's the configuration file that gets downloaded. It has .share extension. This is the full qualified name of the table that's being shared. Right? File it. Oh, yeah. I have this this habit of control enter because we use Databricks notebooks, and I feel like Okay, so it lists all the shares, all the tables within the share, and then it would just load one of the table as Python pandas data frame. Right, so that is what it does. Now from here onwards, you can bring all kinds of different capabilities. Use PySpark, use your any other Python libraries and all that stuff. So I'm going to just summarize real quick. Two types of data gets data exchange not exchange, for lack of better word, sharing comes in the play. It's the metadata and actual data. Metadata is governed and shared by Databricks Unity catalog, and the actual data sharing happens from the recipient's compute to the storage provider. Right? Okay. I'm going to swap my Mac.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, I just want to go back here just to kind of reconnect this with the demo. So if you notice, like in the demo that Pavan did, he did Databricks to Databricks, and then he did Databricks-to-Open. The part, I think there are two parts, which is really you query a table. So there is authentication happening here. But the other part, which I want to highlight, that these tokens are just temporary access token. Temporary. They live, I think the default now is 3 hours, and that's it. So they are minted by the provider and only shared by the, in this case, Databricks to Databricks. They are shared by the UC, the recipient UC instance. So this is kind of give you an idea about the security part. With the D2Open, this is a pre-signed URL that's shared with the connector itself, so they get access to the file because it's and the connector, then it's Parquet file, then through the API, they get access to the data. And again, this is a temporary token that's scoped only to that data as well.
I'll just add one more thing. None of these storage access tokens or pre-signed URLs are pre-generated. We do not pre-generate, we do not store, we do not save or log. What happens is when you actually make a call, that time only all these pre-signed URLs or tokens are created, consumed, and gone. So there's nothing like Databricks would generate and put all those tokens somewhere in Unity catalog and you are just accessing data. That's not happening. Yeah, and all this because we are depending upon cloud native access, right? We don't have any mechanism to directly access storage. We depend upon cloud APIs, whatever they provide, and they have expiry, and we don't know. So there is no need to do any of this, right? And then it also enables you to do log analytics on your storage side. If you turned on your storage log analytics, you will be able to see who is accessing data, right? Because you also need to have some sort of audit capability. So you can correlate between Databricks logs, your storage logs, what is happening.
Yeah, and if you are familiar, by the way, with system tables, there are metrics. I didn't cover it in this presentation, but this is well documented. You can get the metrics to access your shares, and so you can have the right audit in place. Now, I just can go back to the, this is already covered in the demo, which is really the open data sharing. I think you already got a glimpse of the the power of open data sharing, because what Pavan did, he used that credential file to write few lines of Python code. And because he already used the data sharing library, he can get a Panda data frame. And if you're familiar, like Panda data frame, I mean, you can use it in your data science solution and immediately start, kind of working with your model. Now you can use that also to help like store that data as a file, as an example, and then ingest it to another system or work with it. It gives you that flexibility to do to kind of get access to the data. Now, so I want to kind of give you some knowledge kind of about like the open data sharing ecosystem. As you notice, when we say open, what open mean? Open is really that you can consume the data on a non-Databricks platform. You don't have to be in Databricks to be able to access the data. And by the way, as a provider, there's no compute, there's no cost for you except egress cost, right? Because you don't know these guys where they come from. If they are coming from the same cloud, then you don't have egress. But if you, but that's my point. So you can, and by the way, a lot of use cases for open, it can be also for your own organization, for internal sharing. Like one common use case, I work with, it's a retailer. They are on Azure. They have their personalization use cases common with retailers. They have it in GCP, so they want to share the data. They were using like native cloud data replication, but that's a challenge for them because you cannot really refresh the data with native. Every time they have to do like a whole copy of the data, or they have to orchestrate that task, which is quite a bit of work for them. So when you do like Databricks to Databricks, data sharing, this is kind of like, or with actually they did it with open, that's kind of, an acceptable solution for them. So they could refresh the data. And so the other part which I want to highlight, in order to be able to consume the data with open, you will need a connector. If you don't have a connector, a native connector as an example, because it's a different platform. So you look at the consuming platform. What if it is like Power BI? There is a connector for Power BI. There is a connector for Excel, and these connectors this is an open source community, so they develop these connector and they make it available for others. But if you don't, then you can use the Python connector, because with Python connector, as you saw, you could just get the Panda data frame and start working with the data from there. And this is actually continue to expand. Oracle just also added their own connector. We have Tableau. And this is just some of these connector, like Spark connector. This is open source connector. And I think I mentioned the other one, like the Excel add-in connector. This is the same really code that Pavan demoed. Give you kind of an idea how to work. You could also try it and try delta sharing as well. Now, one interesting use case. So if you don't have an open connector, I mentioned you can use Python and Panda, but maybe Panda is like for you, the really use case, you will be, if you can use Spark on the recipient side. As in this particular use case, there is a blog we publish about this. So we use PySpark, which is the same code actually that you already saw. Now you get a PySpark data frame, and from there you can work with it. But because this is also in Google, the Databricks support open source Spark, and then they can save it to a staging table, and they use that to refresh the Bigquery tables. So this will give you an option. My point with this, because having this open capability, you will find it really easy to consume the data in other platform if they have a native connector. If they don't, there is also you can use PySpark or the Python connectors. I put kind of link with these, the blog and the notebook. And they already actually implement even incremental refresh as part of this. So they implemented CDF, because PySpark, you can use, by the way, I mean, we open source Delta, so CDF is open source. And so in the implementation, what our team did, they implemented CDF to consume this data, and then they store And because they're using PySpark, they can store the data locally, and then they data merge with Bigquery. So check out the blog, I think, if you have a similar use case. And if you have a question, by the way, and you are a Databricks customer, I'd be more than happy, both of us will be more than happy to work with you.
Yeah, even if you are not Databricks customer, we'll work. We'll try our best to make you our customer. But no
Yeah,
hard
remember,
feelings.
we are sales also.
Yeah, means everyone is in sales. People don't realize we sell ideas internally. It's slide on time. It says 0, 0.
0, 0, yeah.
We love it.
Thank you very much. These are a great question. Happy
Thank
to
you so much.
help out.